on this edition of the Self-Publishing Show.
The only thing that is actually yours as an author is the physical book, the printed text. That's yours 100%. The second somebody does an audiobook, now it's the narrator's take on your work, so it's already different. And if you sign a film or a TV contract, forget about it. It's not your project anymore.
Publishing is changing. No more gatekeepers. No more barriers. No one standing between you and your readers. Do you want to make a living from your writing? Join indie bestseller Mark Dawson and first-time author James Black as they shine a light on the secrets of self-publishing success. This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Yes, hello, welcome along. It's Friday and I'm James Black.
And I'm Mark Dawson. Hello.
Hello. We're gradually getting used to that new way of introing ourselves, aren't we?
Almost. Yes, almost.
Almost used to it. So the new intro's been bedded in a few weeks. I absolutely love it. I think that it gets us to where we want to be. We have to work hard at this podcast and show, as we now call it, and the video side's important. I've worked very hard to make sure that it looks as posh as possible, as good and professional as possible. We think the intro just helps move that along, helps define it at the beginning as to what it is, which is a slight cut above a lot of the podcasts. Best will in the world. I love listening to lots of podcasts, but and some of them, the quaintness is their way they're put together. But we did want to do things as best as we can, which is the philosophy, by the way, that Mark, you teach to authors about self-publishing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we want it to be really fun and engaging and professional and all of those kinds of words. And it is interesting how the reaction has been. So I posted something a week or two ago just asking people what they thought of the new intro, and I suspect most of the people who answered have podcast listeners, which is still where most of our audience consumes our content. That sounds very
consumes our content. Yeah. Listen.
Very cold. Yeah, well, they enjoy us waffling would be perhaps a better way to put it.
Yeah.
And the response, I'd say, was negative, which was interesting. And then I saw this morning when I got up, someone else had posted into the SPF community how he didn't like the new intro, and fair enough. It was a little bit surprising. We didn't expect that. And the criticism was that it's too slick and too professional now. And also that people didn't like, and this wasn't universal by any means, but people didn't like the new voiceover guy. I felt he was too salesy and American. And this kind of cycles back to something that we said, I think, on the podcast before we launched the new branding, was that the guy who does the voiceover is a guy called Huey Morgan, who is the singer and a DJ in the UK. He's a singer with a band called the Fun Loving Criminals. And I said to you, James, did I not, that he's quite well known in the UK, but back in his homeland, no one knows who he is. And that does appear to be true, doesn't it? That people don't recognise his voice outside of the UK.
It's a very distinctive voice from both his singing and his sort of voiceover work. But yes, he's not, and a lot of people have ID'd him in the UK, but not in the States, which is surprising because he's like a New Jersey kid, isn't he? Or something.
He's Brooklyn, I guess. Yeah.
Brooklyn's, yeah.
So it's interesting. I might do a little kind of survey later on, just in a week or two, out to the wider community, just to see what people think. But we do love it, and it looks great on YouTube. So I would recommend that people, if they haven't seen the full effect, just hop over to YouTube and take a look. I mean, last week's one would have been a good excuse to do that because it was all about video trailers for books. So a very visual episode of the show. But just go and have a look. And if you've got comments, then you can email us. I'm always interested to hear what people think. I'm not bothered that people don't like it, and I do find it interesting and useful, and it will be something that we will consider as we move forwards. But I think between the three of us, me, John, and you, we love it. I mean, I remember showing it to Joanna Penn. She came around to my house not that long ago, and I put it on the big screen, and she was pretty impressed with it. I think it's great. But as I always say, horses for courses. Not everyone's going to share my opinion.
Yeah, and nothing's forever. We'll rebrand again at some point. But I think that you also have to remember that people, and I include myself in this, don't react always that well to change. So when Facebook changed their platform, I mean, actually, there was vitriol online and Twitter when Twitter made some changes. There was vitriol that the world's going to end when this changes, and then everyone gets used to it. And perhaps if it's a good enhancement, and Facebook has got better, I think, in its timeline, then you gradually realise actually it wasn't so bad. And that's, gosh, I can think back to companies. I think changes in companies we've worked at together, where we all go, oh, this is terrible. And like a year later, think actually probably was not a bad move. And so there's a kind of natural instinct. And I think if it's your podcast, you've been listening to this from the beginning. We've got very loyal listeners, our band of loyal listeners who have an ownership of this show. It's as much theirs as ours. And we've suddenly arbitrarily changed aspects of it. So that makes us bristle a bit. And I feel the same way about other things. So there's a little bit of that going on. But that's not to dismiss that some people genuinely think it's not the right fit for our podcast and other people really like it. Now, one thing that did come across, Mark, is quite a few people said they did enjoy our interplay, where we talked about the industry and
I don't enjoy our interplay.
No, a little bit of our social intercourse, a little bit of British humour. And that cropped up quite a few times. That's kind of repeated, Mark. So we are going to do a little bit more expanded area there. But it was in the same week that somebody on our YouTube channel said, by the way, 17 minutes and 26 seconds if you want to skip all the irrelevant guff at the beginning. Right. So clearly it's not for everybody, us talking.
No, but I'm ready for some intercourse, James. You're
ready for social intercourse?
I am.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm good at. So let's do it with that. The first thing I want to do before we have proper social intercourse, foreplay if you like, is to introduce our new
horrible images.
Patreon listeners who've joined us on Patreon at patreon.com/self-publishing show this week. So I want to say a very warm welcome to Michael Malouf from Arden in North Carolina, to Andrew Delaplane, who is from Miami Beach in Florida. How very cool. Eliza Peak and Ivy Lane. Thank you so much indeed for joining us as Patreon supporters. It means the world to me and Mark, and it pays for Huey Morgan's Scooby snacks, doesn't it?
It does, yes.
His expenses now. He was a very good value, I would say. And if you want to know anything about how to put a podcast together, we do now know bits and pieces about this. So one of the things that people wanted to hear about was, believe it or not, my book.
Well, I'd like to hear about it. How's it going?
Well, I had a bit of a milestone. I didn't even notice until a day or two later, but my milestone was 100,000 words in what is the third and final draft of where we are. So I'm now looking at 103,331. So I'm writing 20,000 words a month at the moment. And that is getting me to where I need to be to publish this year. So I wanted to do it in spring, April, might be June now, looking at it. So where am I with this book? And I have blogged about this. It's on the website. In that I started working with an editorial team I met them in August via the podcast, Jenny Nash, Author Accelerator Program. And she hooked me up. We had a couple of sessions together, going through the outline and the structure. And then she hooked me up with my dedicated editor, who's Lizette Clark, who's been brilliant. And I now write my scenes every week. They go to Lizette. She gives me feedback. We talk about how the novel's progressing, having done the work on the outline at the beginning. And at the end of this process is effectively a developmentally edited draft. Now, that's not to say there's no more work to do when I get to the end of this, because there's going to be some developmental tweaks in that there's at least 2 chunks in the book where, not massive chunks, but where Lizette and I are thinking they might even come out or be compressed into a couple of small scenes, but that's fairly easily done. And there's obviously going to need all the copy and proof editing to get it ready, but that's it. So that's quite exciting for me. So this is not one of the drafts I've done before where I'm just thinking, oh, it's such a mess, I don't know where to start. This is a flowing, readable book now, which is very exciting for me. What surprised me is that structurally, so at the beginning, on page 1, there's an event and things unfold from there, and the protagonist has to basically work out what's been going on in the background. And Lizette and Jenny just said, look, explain to me what has happened before the event so we know what the secret is, if you like. When I put that in, this single page that described that, they both said, that's a huge part of the book. It was compelling the way you described that. You've got to start the book early. You've got to start the book with all of this leading up to the event. So that's what I've done, which has been really exciting. Now, here's the intriguing thing. I'm at 103,331 words, and I haven't got to that event yet. Which is surprising for me, because the entire book was after it. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be 200,000 words, this novel. It's not.
I hope not.
No, but the structure's changed a little bit, and there's a lot. I mean, I worried. I'm a short form guy. I've been brought up in the realms of the BBC where you compress complex stories into 90 seconds of script, actually 45 seconds of script for a 90-second TV piece with a couple of clips in there. And you've got to tell lucid, complex stories quickly and easy with a little arc in there. And that's what I'm quite good at, and I've been brought up to do. Now I worry about being able to write long form, about letting it breathe, about having things unfold in front of you. And yet I've really surprised myself with when I know what I'm doing, when the editor and I worked out, well, this is what's happening next, how much I've enjoyed and got on with that writing aspect of it. So that's sort of where I am. So I don't know. I think I need to keep it to a minimum of maximum of 50,000 more words. I think 150,000 words for a thriller is
too high.
Yeah, a lot.
Well, that's much too high.
Bearing in mind we're going to cull probably a chunk in the middle. But it's not going to be necessarily that short a book. I mean, this is 383 pages according to Scrivener at the moment.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be short, but I think all of my books, I think if I've gone over 100,000, it would have been once or twice.
Right.
So, those books behind me, the Milton ones, they would be 350 to 400 pages when they're printed. And that would be around about 100,000 words. That's kind of, I shoot between 80 and 100,000 most of the time. That's kind of the perfect length for me. So it's not to say that you can go longer. And I mean, Tom Clancy, for example, his thrillers I'm guessing would be around about 150,000 words. Some of those big, chunky doorstops.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't go too much further than 120. But your story, that's your story. I haven't read the story yet. Maybe it needs a few more words in there. But that's really what your editor is helping you with.
Yeah. Well, considering the whole thing takes place, it starts on the 7th of June, 1966, and it's currently the 22nd of June. Doesn't happen over a long time period, but obviously a lot happens too.
That doesn't matter. I mean, Ulysses takes place over the course of 12 hours in one man's head, and is about, I don't know how many words that is, but I'm thinking it must be 150,000 words, something along those lines.
Yeah. And there's a think a Nelson DeMille book called By the Rivers of Babylon about the hijack of a couple of El Al Concords, and that whole thing was 24 hours. That was a doorstep book. That was a brilliant book.
I love the way I bring James Joyce into the conversation and you retort with Nelson DeMille. That's everything that everyone needs to know about our relationship.
I've probably got that wrong, but when I was 15, they were the books I was reading. I'm not reading Ulysses now, by the way.
No. We can have a whole conversation about James Joyce, but we'll do that another time.
So that's where I am with the book, which is exciting because we are getting there. And I interviewed Sasha Black for the podcast. She's talking about how to create a good baddie and a good hero, and a really good podcast interview. But she's the person who I sort of drunkenly shook hands with at London Book Fair last year and said, this time next year, the book will be in my hands. I have said to her, I'm just going to export this to KDP, print one copy and bring it to London Book Fair so she'll work out it doesn't end. But and it's been brilliant. What's been brilliant is that I've gone from somebody who I had written this book before we met, actually whilst we knew each other at the BBC, before any of this SPF thing happened. But during the process, I've grown up a little bit as a writer and matured a little bit in that sense. And I now, hopefully, the interviews I do with writers, I have more of an insight into the process and the pitfalls and that's why I'm always interested in how people write and how they coalesce their ideas, etc. So it's been interesting for me to develop as a writer a little bit, even if I still haven't quite got to that publication book.
Well, you're getting there. There's lots of people who are itching to buy a copy.
That's obviously the entire plan of the whole SPF project, as far as I'm concerned, is to surreptitiously bounce my book. Now, yesterday I interviewed, who did I interview yesterday? Oh, Mark Stay from the Bestseller Experiment, a podcast in the same space that we broadcast in, and they had that project a couple of years back, to the two of them, the two Marks, to write a bestseller and get it into the KDP bestseller list. I think they wanted to get it into 5 or 6 lists, which they did do. And And so I had a really interesting chat with him about the whole, the targeting of categories and the narrowing down of genres and so on. And they learned a lot through that process as well. So I'm starting now, as I get past 100,000 words and can sort of definitely see light at the end of the tunnel, start thinking about that. How am I going to market this? And
if only you knew someone who knows how to market digital books.
Yeah, what I need is a course of some description.
Yeah.
In fact, when I do the 101 course for real, talk about it being tailored to me.
Well, it
will literally be my book.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I do realise KDP's I'm going to go, this is all going to go wrong for me now, because also that book was published during the 101 course.
That's right.
It was briefly published.
It was. We can. That's okay. We can get that taken off. Not a problem.
We need to speak to Darren and get that. What's going to happen is I'm going to publish this. And I'm going to get one of those emails from Amazon saying this is not your work. This has been previously published, and and they'll never accept anything from me to convince them that it's mine. But anyway, that's where we are. I'm absolutely loving the writing process. I do find it difficult to find the time. This week has been particularly difficult, but I try and sit down. Like I say, it was 24,000 words in January, and if I can average 1,000 words a day, just under 850 words a day, I think, in January, but 20,000 a month, that gets me to the finished book. End of March. And then that gives me 2 months.
Well, then you have the other editing, copy editing, proofreading, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I'd beta readers as well, if you want to follow the model that I use, which I recommend, especially if you can get some people in your team who have more experience of aviation than you do. Yeah. So I know you know some, or you've met through the podcast, some commercial flyers and some military pilots. That would be a good idea to get the book out to those guys so they can not necessarily correct your errors, although there'll be some that they can change, but to layer in things that you don't know that you need to know. Yeah, that's the thing with my stuff is, I get, I might not have known that I needed to research something because I didn't know that was an issue, but they will know that, a certain weapon doesn't work that way. And they'll give me they'll tell me first of all that I was wrong. And secondly, they'll give me a little bit of information that I can very deftly, hopefully, layer into the narrative to make readers think that I know what I'm talking about, when of course I have no idea what I'm talking about at all. So that's fun. I enjoy that process. But it is a skill. It's something you practice.
So one question for you is, in terms of time, excuse me, to get this published appositely, would it be acceptable to send out an advanced copy that hasn't been proofed and copy edited? It hasn't been proofed and copy edited, but can you ignore that aspect of it and give me?
Some people will do that. I don't. So for my process, it's copy edited before it goes to the beta readers, because that serves two purposes for me. They'll pick up factual errors, but they'll also pick up typos that have slipped through the copy edit. So the last one I did that with, it was professionally edited, but there were probably still 20 errors, probably more than that actually, but 20 ones that I would be unhappy releasing the book with those errors in there. So for example, there was one, a sentence where he got out of the station and walked 5 minutes to the station. So, right. That slipped through, and that's one of those things. It does happen. The best editors will miss things. But almost every one of my beta readers reported that. So it's the kind of thing that's stuck out to them. And so that's gone now. And this process for the Vault, which is the book that I'm talking about, I got a very, very detailed, factually based report from one of my readers who used to work for the State Department in the US and has some experience of working in Berlin during the Cold War, which is exactly where this book is set. So that kind of stuff. He also picks up errors as well. But when you add in that kind of level of detail, the book that comes out at the end of it feels like, because I'm quite good now at taking those little gems that readers give me and then very, very subtly putting them in. So and the way to do that is, if they tell me something to do with a weapon, I will just maybe use 1 or 2% of the things that they told me, And like an iceberg, all the rest of the knowledge I leave below the surface, but just the fact that I use something that feels authentic gives the ultimate reader the impression that, I there's more I could tell them, but I'm not telling them because it's not necessary. So it's info dumping and doing it properly, but we can I can help you with that.
Yes, well, maybe I will send it out to...
I should probably read it at some point.
Yeah, you could read it at some point. I'll send it out to the Dave Gledhills, who was an RAF fastjet navigator. People like him, and there's a few other Vulcan people who've contacted me. Send it out to the
Vulcans?
Yes, the Vulcans, yeah. Nano, Remo.
That's it. Nano Remo. Oh, my goodness.
Send it out to them and tell them to ignore the copy stuff, and then send it out to a proper art team. I mean, not proper art team, but the kind of readers who write and read books. People like Sasha, for instance, volunteered to read it for me, and I'd love people like that to. Anyway, so that's where I am. That's the last flight. 103,000 words so far, and not quite got to the beginning yet, which is interesting, isn't it? So. Good. You've got another book called The Vault, published under the SPF Books brand.
I do. That's the Knowledge Vault, isn't it?
Yes. Okay. Just double check. It's you're not going to confuse Amazon in its own way. Right. Have we talked about everything we need to talk about? Where are we now? We are 21 minutes. So that grumpy man on YouTube can say, well, if you want to get rid of all the, get past all the irrelevant guff, jump to 21 minutes. Or listen to another podcast.
Well, there is that. But yes, let's hurry along.
Yeah, let's hurry along. So our interviewee today is a brilliant author who's appeared once before on the podcast. His name is JD Barker. We had a quick chat with him at Thriller Fest, and JD is somebody who he's more a traditional published author in the sense that that's where he's been in. He's connected, very well connected. He works with, can we say this? I think we can say this. He does say this in an interview. He works with James Patterson, and he has worked with the family of Bram Stoker to write a kind of prequel to Dracula, which has been published in the last 6 months. And but he's one of these people who's just hugely excited about the indie world. He loves self-publishing. He's done a bit of it himself in the past, and he loves talking to authors about being... he's convinced that a good self-published author is indistinguishable from a good trad-published author, and that distinction is being blurred and disappearing. And he's a big advocate for self-publishing being as good as it can be. He wants the traditional industry to be knocked off its platform by the weight. That's probably not right to say he wants it to be knocked off its platform, but he wants it to be indistinguishable from self-publishing. And so you and he kind of sat on a panel together and were both saying the same thing, and you'd never met each other before.
There were high fives and all kinds of things.
There were high fives, there were. It was natural for us to get together afterwards.
I don't do high fives, I'm English. But I was in my head, I was high fiving him.
Yes. Or headbutting him, yes. But you and he definitely from the same philosophical school. Are you going to say anything?
No, I'm going to say let's play the interview.
Oh, let's play the interview. Okay, let's hear from JD Barker. We'll be back afterwards. Mark will say something then.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
JD Barker, welcome back, and welcome to the Self-Publishing Show. We bumped into each other in New York in the summer, and it was a real pleasure to meet you. And I'm quite pleased, by the way, that for somebody with gothic horror running through them, you've got a dark environment. There's a picture on the wall behind you that's so black, it looks like there might be a moon in it, and it actually looks like you're in somebody's basement, which is perfect, right?
Yeah, no, I'm actually in an upstairs bedroom. I've got a window. I think the picture that you see is actually, it's the cover of my first book, Forsaken. I had it printed on a piece of glass with a dark background that's sitting up there behind me.
But I like it. There's a creaking door somewhere in the background. A slightly creaky line, but we're going to persevere because we want to talk to you about this. So we chatted in New York at Thriller Fest, and it was a fascinating but brief chat, and I promised that I would get you back on the podcast and wanted to do that. But we may as well just remind people about you and your background. So just give us a quick introduction to JD Barker.
Yeah, so I've had a crazy history. I actually started off working for newspapers and magazines way back in the 90s, doing a lot of celebrity interviews. And to really date myself, this was people like Tiffany and Debbie Gibson and Bon Jovi and Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses.
Who could forget Tiffany?
Absolutely.
Those shopping centers will never be the same.
Yeah, well, I worked for RCA Records and for BMG, and I used to chaperone these people. I would pick them up at the airport and take them to their hotel, get them to the radio station, get them to their concert. And if I was lucky, especially with a band like Guns N' Roses, I'd get them all back on the airplane and not lose anybody. But I quickly realized I had these people captive in a car for sometimes days at a time, so I would interview them. And I'd turn around and I sold those interviews to newspapers and magazines to offset my student loans. I was in college at the time. And over time, if you work with anybody in newspaper or magazines, that you quickly realize everybody's got a novel in some stage of development hidden away in a desk drawer somewhere that they've been toiling away at for the last 10 years. It's at 250,000 words, and they will get it done. But I became the de facto guy to help with that kind of thing. I started off by just editing the magazine articles for grammar, punctuation, things like that. And then people started handing me these books they were working on, and I helped with those types of things with them, and that eventually turned into developmental stuff. And I fell into a career as a book doctor and ghostwriter, which I didn't even realize was a career until it happened. And I did that for almost I think it was about 23 years. And it was fun. I mean, I literally learned how to write on the backs of other people's problems, because by correcting these things, I learned to understand what agents were looking for, what publishers were looking for, and I really learned how to tie a novel together and create a tight product. And that's what it really is. I mean, people need to realize that it may be a work of passion, but in the end, that book is a product. It's a widget. It's something somebody wants to sell, somebody wants to buy, and you need to understand that going in. Over those 23 years, I had 6 different books that hit the New York Times bestseller list, all with other people's names on them. That starts to eat at you after a little while.
Yes.
When the 6th one hit, that was in 2012, my wife pulled me aside and said, listen, I think we need to try and make this work. Try and see if you can make it happen as a writer on your own. That's what you want to do. Let's figure out what we need to do to make it happen. So we were living in Florida at the time. I was still working a day job. I was a chief compliance officer for a brokerage firm, which is as horrible as it sounds. But the salary was good, so it was difficult to walk away from. But we sold everything that we had. We sold our house, we sold the boat, we sold the cars. Everything that was costing us money, that was basically increasing our monthly nut, we got rid of. And we moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in Pittsburgh, which we owned, and just got our monthly cost down as low as we possibly could so we could live off of savings, and I could spend a year or two trying to make the writer thing happen. I wrote my first book. It was called Forsaken. And in the novel, anybody's written a novel, it's all about getting to that last page. And in the book, I had to explain where the wife buys a journal. And just to get the book done, I wrote that she walked into Needful Things, Stephen King's store, and bought it there. And I fully expected to have to change that, because you can't just play in Stephen King's universe without a bunch of lawyers sending you letters and calling you. But my wife, again, she's way smarter than me. She read it and she said, no, I kind of like this. Let's keep it. Let's just get his permission to use it. Which, how do you get Stephen King's permission to do much of anything? Turns out we had a mutual friend, a guy named Jack Ketchum, who recently passed away. I told him what I was up to. He gave me King's email address and told me to send it to him. And he said, well, if Steve likes it, he'll get back to you. If the book sucks, you probably won't hear from him. Leave him alone. And I ended up hearing back from him. I got an email from Stephen King. He said, I absolutely love this. Go ahead and use it and let me know if you need anything. Wow. I stared at that for about 4 months, expecting the retraction. This was meant for Grisham. It wasn't meant for you. Sorry about that. But at night, turned out it was for real, and he let me go with it. So I fully expected at that point that selling the book would be a non-issue. I've got Stephen King's blessing to use some of his characters in there. I knew it was a solid book. How hard could it possibly be? So I sent a query letter out to 200 agents, a form letter. Never do that. I got a handful of responses back. Hardly anybody even asked to read the book. I got really discouraged, and I decided this just wasn't for me. I had one offer to publish it from a small press. They were going to give me like a $5,000 advance, and the payouts were horrible. So I decided to go ahead and indie publish it. But I figured if I was going to do that, I needed to make sure that it was on par with the titles coming out of the top 5. It had to look like a Random House book. I didn't want to just go to Amazon and hit that publish button. So I hired professionals across the board. I hired professional cover designers, professional editors, professional copy editors, proofreaders, everything I possibly could, and released the book in November 2014. It's hardback, softcover, audiobook, the full gambit. Did it through an LLC, so if anybody dug around a little bit, it would look like it was published by a real company, not some guy in his basement, and got really lucky. The book ended up selling a lot of copies. And while that was going on, it got nominated for a Bram Stoker Award, which was awesome, for Best Debut Novel. And I was writing my second book, a serial killer called The Fourth Monkey. And when I finished that, I looked at my sales numbers for Forsaken and my payouts, and thought about it a little bit. I'm like, I might be better off just self-publishing this. My wife told me to go ahead and just query a couple agents, just see what happens. If you don't get what you're looking for, self-publish it. You know how to do it. You know you can make money doing it. So I queried 53 agents, and this was February 2015. And apparently they saw my track record, because within 2 weeks I had 13 offers of representation. So I kind of had a pick of agents, and I ended up going with a woman named Kristen Nelson, who is phenomenal. There's two websites that I love to plug when I talk about agents, because a lot of people don't research their agents. If somebody, an agent says they want your book, they tend to just kind of sign on the dotted line. But there's ways to check on agents to make sure they're legit and make sure they're what you're really looking for. Query Tracker is a great one, querytracker.com, for just following up on what agents need, what their types of responses, things along those lines. And another one, which I found tremendous, was Publishers Marketplace, because you can plug in an agent's name and you can see what kind of deals they're getting. And one of the things I noticed about Kristen is she had a very small group of authors that she was working with, but they were all New York Times bestsellers, and they all got there with her. She started with their debuts and she got them to that level, and her deals that she was getting for them, they were all 6- and 7-figure deals. Many agents out there, it's very easy to throw a website together and make it look like you're a professional, and I see people fall into that trap all the time. So I think it's really important to research them. But she took Fourth Monkey out there. It ended up selling for film and television before the print rights sold. Then I got what was called a preemptive offer out of the UK from HarperCollins. That came in, and then the U.S. rights sold at auction. By the time everything was said and done, that book brought in a little over $1 million. Wow. which is tremendous. So it allowed me to continue, working as a full-time writer. While that was going on, I kind of figured, like, lightning struck in a bottle with me with Stephen King. I figured that was kind of the end of it. But while Forsaken was nominated for that Bram Stoker Award, I was at the award ceremony, the Horror Writers Association, and Dacre Stoker, who's Bram's great-grandnephew, kept approaching me and said, we need to talk. And we eventually had breakfast on the final day I was there, and he sprung this on me. He said, my family and I have read your book. We absolutely love the writing style, and we've been trying to find somebody to write a prequel to Dracula for a while now using Bram's original notes. Is that something you'd be interested in? Of course, I said yes. That book is done as well. It came out October 2nd. And again, the film rights actually sold before the publishing rights. That was a crazy whirlwind of a trip, because we ended up going to New York. We had 8 different publishers that wanted the book. So we flew to New York and we started meeting with them one at a time, all on a Monday. And while we were in the car and the Ubers going from one to the next, we were on the phone with the film studios, talking to them about this novel. And it ended up selling. The book sold to Putnam. The film rights went to Paramount, with Andy Machete attached to direct, who's currently redoing it for Stephen King. So a phenomenal team. So I'm having a ball. And I figured, okay, now lightning struck twice. It's not going to happen again. And I'm working on my next book, and I get a phone call, and it's James Patterson. And he read Fourth Monkey, gave me an incredible blurb for it. He called it ingenious. And we ended up meeting down in Florida. We had lunch. We talked about a couple different ideas and agreed to write a book together. We actually just, the last chapter got written today on that one. So it's been nuts. But I've been thrown...
That is nuts.
Yeah, I've been thrown into the middle of all the different publishing methods out there, because now I've got books with 3 of the top 5, and I've self-published. So I've kind of walked the line in between both of those worlds.
Yeah, well, there's lots to talk about there. Did you know Jim Patterson?
No, I sent him, one of the most important things, or at least you're told they're important, are blurbs on the back of books. So I reached out to a lot of different people to try and get blurbs for Fourth Monkey when it was coming out, and he was one of them. I mailed a copy to his house. I didn't expect anything to come of it, because he probably gets, 50 books a week. I know Stephen King gets somewhere like 100 to 100 books a week. I mean, it's ridiculous. So your book kind of disappears, but it felt like something I needed to do. And then the phone call came, and it just kind of went from there. He liked the book, and I talked about projects that he had worked on in the past. How Along Came a Spider. Some of those books really inspired me. We just kind of hit it off. And I've got a house in Florida. My parents live fairly close to him, so we went down for the holidays, and I was in the area. So it just kind of all fell together.
Well, that's amazing. Well, the first thing we should note, of course, JD, is the tribute to your writing, because this is not quite lightning. This is people reading your books and being very impressed with the way you write and wanting to have a piece of you. And if their name's Patterson or King, that's helpful. Okay, so now the Jim Patterson project is about to come to an end. Will there be something that follows that up, do you think?
It's hard to say. I mean, I've got a bad habit of leaving a couple of dangling strings at the end of every book that kind of leave those doors open. I have trouble saying goodbye to certain characters, especially when, once I start having fun with them, it's tough to do. Killed off a lot of people, but some of the best ones are still there. So we'll see. I mean, ultimately it's up to him and up to his publisher. I'm definitely game. One of the reasons why I did this project was just to be able to work with somebody like James Patterson. It's like going to school. He weighs in on every single thing that I send him and vice versa. And just having that dialogue with somebody like that, that's a priceless education. I wasn't going to turn it down.
Yeah, absolutely. And he is somebody who gives back to the community by teaching a bit as well. He's got his own masterclass, hasn't he? And it was a very cool moment actually in New York when we were interviewing you and your phone went and you said, I've got to take this. It's James Patterson.
It's funny. He's got a habit of doing that. He doesn't use email. He loves the phone. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it's because I'm always busy or whatever, but it's like his phone calls always seem to come in at moments just like that. Not while I'm sitting at my desk doing nothing. It's in the middle of an interview with you guys.
He's got a sixth sense. Okay, well, I want to talk to you about some of the areas that you've mentioned there. So you've got these amazing things that have happened to you, but you're very dedicated. We got a hint of that when you said at the beginning of your first book, at the end of your first book, when you were coming to publish it, your decision to self-publish it, you wanted it to look indistinguishable from trade published titles. So just talk to me a little bit about that mindset you think authors need to have. And the reason I ask you, it's not obvious to everyone. And certainly there are people in the industry who think that self-publish means much lower quality, but it doesn't have to be, does it?
No, and that's one of the things that actually frustrates me about the entire process. I mean, every year there's about 1 million books that are published. Your book is one of them. So you need to figure out how you're going to make that book stand out. And I don't see other indie published authors really as my competition. I don't necessarily see any authors as competition, but I do see the publishing houses as competition. And if I'm going to put out a product, it needs to be on par with the best. I mean, that's why I seek out people like Stephen King, and I talk to Dean Koontz fairly regularly too via email. I'm not going to go to Joe Blow, the indie guy who's got 12 books out there and 6 reviews and ask him for advice. I'm going to go to the people that have been there and have gotten it right. But I think that's where I do see a lot of indie authors really drop the ball. They get the book done. A lot of times it's just a first draft. And then they run over to Amazon, they upload, they hit that publish button with a cover that they made on their computer 10 minutes earlier. And then they expect to become famous, expect the money to start rolling in. And it's never what happens. What does happen is you'll see 4 or 5 copies get picked up by their friends and family. Those 4 or 5 reviews will come out and they'll all be 5 stars because they are your friends and family. And then either the book will disappear into oblivion or somebody else will find it and review it for what it really is, full of typos, not professional, not a complete story, all the problems that everybody has with a first draft. Nobody writes the perfect first draft, including people like Patterson and King. You got to comb through those books. You've got to perfect them. You've got to get them to the absolute best level that they can possibly be before they come out. And that's what I was getting at with that. You need to, if you're going to do this and you want to do it right, you do need to compete on that level, and you have to be prepared for that. And there's a lot of similarities between the two. I mean, the one thing that really gets me is cover design. A lot of people skimp on cover design. And that's, people do buy their books based on the cover. And that's, it's sad. It's always been that way. I mean, it used to be you walk into the grocery store and at the checkout line, there was, paperbacks right there. You picked up the ones with the most interesting covers. Amazon is no different. You're still doing that. It's just a different format. So when I did the cover for Forsaken, as an example, I used a company called 99 Designs, which is phenomenal. For I think it's $399. You put your ideas out there, basically what you want the cover to be like. If you've got examples of images, you can put those out there, and designers will create covers for you. And over the course of a week, you'll get anywhere from 30 to 50 to 60 different cover ideas, and those designers will work with you to perfect them and tweak them. So when I did that with Forsaken, I took my top 10 favorite and I put them up on the internet. And I've got a pretty decent sized following. And I had one question on there. I said, if you were to buy a book based solely on its cover, which one would you select? And that's the cover that I went with. The one that's on the book got 86% of the votes. It wasn't my favorite, but everybody else seemed to like it. And personally, I feel crowdsourcing stuff like that is key. Now, when you go with the trad publishers, the big guys, they don't do that. Your editor will send an email to the cover design department. Your book will get assigned to somebody that most likely won't read the book. They'll create a cover based on whatever the editor's suggestions, might be. And that's what you you kind of get stuck with. And a couple people in that department might weigh in on it. The marketing people have more of a say than anybody else. It's a very weird environment, and all my contracts allow me to push back and nix a cover if I don't like it. But at the same time, they'll hang that over your head. If you change the cover and the book doesn't sell, they're going to say, well, if we went with that original cover, it
was your fault.
Yeah, it was your fault.
That's what's brilliant about that is not only this is you trying to make sure that your book is indistinguishable from traditional published books, but this is you getting an edge on the trad publishers, because we can act in a much more flexible and digital way than a big publishing house that, as you say, has an art department that they basically have to go to get their covers done. We can go to the best independent cover designer on the planet if we want, or go to another one.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got total control over that. And when you deal with the traditional guys, that's the hardest thing to do, is to give up that control, whether it's cover design or interior text or whatever it might be. And sometimes it's little things. Right now, Dracula is it's a finalist for the Goodreads Choice Awards. It's top 10 or so of the horror books for this year, which is phenomenal. So I started going through all these things as an indie that I would do to start pushing that, to get some of those votes to come in, email going out to my group, this going on, advertising going on, all these little things. If you go to somebody like, in this case, it's Putnam Random House, and you tell them you would like to do all of those things, it's got to get approved by a lot of different people. The budget's got to get approved. This department has to agree to do it. It has to fit within their timing. It's like almost like you're running along and you get stuck in molasses, and you have to go slow and you have to push. It will still get done if you push hard enough, but a lot of times the decisions that can be made as an indie, you can flip a switch, you can make it happen, and it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I absolutely love that take on it. The idea of somebody throwing their hands up in the air and saying, well, what chance have we got up against Penguin Random House? Well, you've got the one thing they desperately know that they want but don't have, which is this agility, this ability to make quick decisions and get ahead of the market. So you were in a strong position being indies. And that's, from your point of view, you've done a great traditional deal. You did an amazing deal, although I suspect the fact that you had proven the worth of the book as an indie was a factor in being able to negotiate that type of deal.
Oh, absolutely. The indie authors that are out there, that Amazon is really a proving ground. There's a lot of people watching to see who's a million books published every year, which ones are rising to the top, which ones are standing out. Everybody's got eyeballs on that. With each of those publishers that I talked to on Fourth Monkey, one of the first questions they asked me was about my social media presence and what type of marketing activities do I do on my own. They already liked the book, but they wanted to know what I was going to bring to the table from that standpoint. And if you go back even 3, 4, 5 years, those questions weren't on the radar of these guys. They're slowly coming around. They're realizing, as an indie, you have to do what I call guerrilla marketing. There's a lot of things you can do and a lot of things you can't do. It's very difficult to get into traditional press, for one thing. So you have to offset that by going to bloggers or getting it through some other means. They're coming around to actually doing some of that. BookBub, if you go back a few years ago, was all indie titles. Now it's not. It's a mix of both. They're realizing what's working and they're starting to do some of it. And it's taken them a little while to get there, but they are. But at the same time, I stay in touch with a lot of indie authors. I try to stay on top of what's working, and there are a lot of new things out there that aren't on indie authors' radars yet. It's just a couple people are trying it, realizing it's working, and so slowly that will trickle. And by the time it gets into the masses, those people have moved on to something new, and sooner or later it'll make it to the traditional side.
Well, luckily we work close with Mark Dawson, who tends to have hands on all the goodies first. In fact, I've seen a couple of things he's trying now with Amazon, which are top secret but look amazing. Okay, so your own position on this now is that you are traditionally published. Do you think that's always going to be the way for you in the future now?
No, and I've got a couple of things I'm trying to resolve. I don't want to get pigeonholed into writing the same book over and over again. I love writing into the horror world. I love writing thrillers. I like to bounce back and forth. The common thread between all my books is really suspense, and that's how I sell it to my agent. But immediately, as soon as you go to an agent, they do want to pigeonhole you. They want to say, this is a thriller author, this is a romance author, this is a sci-fi author. They want to put you in that box because that's what the industry itself understands. Editors are looking for somebody in that box. The marketing people are, the bookstores are. So if you want to bounce around a little bit, it's tricky. My agents and publishers are kind of on board now at this point with me doing that, but it's been an uphill battle for sure because it's not the norm to be able to bounce around that way. But I've made it very clear that I'm going to write the kind of books that I want to write, And, whether they go out through somebody like Random House or I publish it on my own, the book will get out there. There's a lot of things you've got to weigh when it comes to that type of thing. I mean, the advance is one thing, but you really have to look at the economics of that. It's wonderful to get a big check. Nobody's going to argue with that. But, you got to look at the payouts on the back end. Amazon, you're getting 70%, you're getting 70 cents on the dollar. A traditional deal, you're lucky if you're getting 25%, if you're getting 25 cents on the dollar. So once you eat through that advance amount, and keep in mind, you're paying for it at a smaller level because of the sizes that you're collecting. Once you get through that on the back end, you're still getting that smaller payout. So you have to look at the advance number that they're offering you and decide whether that's really worth giving up what you're giving up. Because you can make a lot of money as an indie author, but it takes time. It doesn't come in all in one shot. It may take a year or 2 years or whatever, but it can happen, and that's it's difficult for a lot of people to grasp that.
Yeah, the math is simple, isn't it? And I read an article a couple of years ago. It might be out of date, that suggested that the average percentage for a first-time author deal in the UK was 8%. That was there.
That might be. In the UK, I'm at roughly 25% on each of my deals.
Yeah. So, but the point being that you have to sell far fewer books to earn the same money, and of course, you sell the same number of books you did on a traditional deal. It's the difference between being able to quit your 9 to 5 and live as a writer sometimes. And we hear this. I meet traditional writers all the time who complain they don't really make money.
Oh, absolutely. I know a number of New York Times bestselling authors that have day jobs. Just because of that. And it's not just because of the money, it's because of the way the process is structured. The traditional publishers, they try to get that big hit right out of the gate on publication date. They want to get the bulk of their sales because they want to hit that list. But there's not really a long-term plan. It's almost like a movie coming out of the theaters. It's in the theaters for a couple of weeks and then it disappears. The indie authors, if you do it right, you're getting that residual income. In my case, it's actually increased. Forsaken is selling better month over month, even though it's been out for 4.5 years than it was at the beginning. It's a very different structure. The traditional guys, they want to get those 6,000, 7,000, 10,000 sales or whatever it is, from a debut in that first week. And if it doesn't hit that list, they see those numbers drop.
Yeah, one of the sorry, I was just going to say one of the mantras at 20 Books Vegas conference last week is the best way to sell your last book is your next book.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I tend to run, I did a talk last night, so a lot of this stuff is kind of fresh in my mind, but a lot of authors will sign a traditional deal just because they want to be able to walk into a bookstore and pick up their book from the shelf. And I get that. Like I was at Penn State, so I was in a town that I'm not normally in. So I ran to Barnes & Noble, I ran to the 2 or 3 other bookstores that were in town. I grabbed all my copies, I signed them all, and it's a cool feeling to be able to do that, or walk into a library and find your book. But like when I look at Forsaken, I probably sell, maybe 500 ebooks for every physical copy that goes out the door. And I'm making a decent amount of money. So is that money worth giving up, just to have that presence in a physical store? And most of the time that presence doesn't last very long. In places like Barnes & Noble or Waterstones, those tables, it's bought and paid for. Your publisher is putting you there for a certain amount of money for a certain amount of time. So you're not going to be there forever.
It depends what your definition of success is, and it's absolutely fine to measure your success in that way if that's what you want to do. Most people listening to this podcast probably want to live and get paid as a writer, so they're going to be very commercially minded, and that's also okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, something that I'm really looking at closely now. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm open to, doing books, basically being a hybrid author, self-publishing some titles and going through traditional on others, because there are things that the traditional side can offer that you can't necessarily do on your own. It's much easier to get into foreign languages. I'm in, I think, 31 different languages at this point, which is over 100 different countries. You can do that as an indie. There's sites called, like BabbleCube is a phenomenal one for getting your books into other languages, but it's a difficult uphill battle to do. Some of the marketing that they can do, you just can't do. Like I'm in a lot of magazines, a lot of newspapers that would never touch an indie author. I just had a full page spread, I think, in AARP this month on Dracula, which is not something that would even be on my radar as an indie. So if I look at these things as marketing opportunities, what can the traditional guys do that are different from what I can do? And how can I take advantage of both of those to take my entire platform, my brand, and bring it to a higher level?
Yeah, you talked about print books a little bit. So let's just focus on that for a moment, because you said when you did self-publish to start off with, you released on all formats at the same time. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. I did a hardcover, a softcover, audiobook, and then eventually 6 months later put out the mass market paperback.
Okay, so you did it in the traditional timescale almost. Perhaps slightly faster than they do because they seem to take a long time between various formats. But hard book, I mean, I'm surprised about that. And was that profitable to you, the physical book? Because that's an area that indies do struggle to make money on, I think.
It is profitable, but I think on the hardcover I only make like $2 and change. Versus the ebook, even at $2.99, I think I make a little bit more than that. You end up with like $2.03 or something after Amazon takes their cut. So it's more about just having it available to everybody. I think when Kindle first came out, it was a bit of a novelty. People liked the idea of it. So a lot of people bought Kindles. A lot of people bought books on Kindle. But eventually it's kind of faded away and people are kind of falling into, what is my best method for reading a book? Like what is going to work for me at this particular moment? So in my case, I run 5 miles a day. So I listen to an audiobook while I'm running, from Audible. At night when I read, I like to read on my phone because it's backlit. So I read my Kindle on there. We've got a lake house that's got a deck overlooking the water. So if I'm out there, I like to have a physical book. To me, that's the most relaxing. My wife won't touch anything other than physical book. She was reading it the other day in bed and holding this thing up with one hand and her arm was shaking because the book is so big, but she refuses to touch a Kindle book. I think people are starting to realize what format they like and they're kind of going with that. It's nice. I mean, it's just that books are now available in more formats than ever. And I think there's going to be new ones. We just haven't figured out what they are yet.
Yeah. And it's getting easier and easier to do all these things. So you mentioned Audible and there's Findaway Voices and all sorts of other ways of getting your audiobook out there. KDP Print on Demand, which is now integral to the KDP dashboard, makes it a few clicks of the button to have the paperback available. And although it is more difficult to make money, one of the things that we say to people is if you don't do it, it's some money on the table because some people only read print and they'll look at your book, they'll be attracted by all the bits you've got right, all the blurb, all the cover, those first few seconds, and then they can't find the book for sale because it's only on Kindle. Why would you have that when it's you? Even if you're only making $1 a time, it's a bit more exposure. So that's one of the great things. Technology is a great enabler for writers to do that bit easily and focus their time on writing the next book.
Yeah, the audiobook is huge. I see a lot of people not do an audiobook, and I never got that. I pay for it out of pocket. I mean, ACX makes it unbelievably easy to create an audiobook. If you can't afford to go out of pocket for the cost, you can split it with the narrator. So there's ways to get it done. I ended up paying, out of pocket for it. I think I ended up at $250 per finished hour for Forsaken. It was a little over 10 hours. So, a little shy of $3,000 or so. To get that audiobook done, but it actually paid for itself within the first month, and it's one of my biggest money makers still today. And personally, like when I go into Amazon and look at a title, I look to see what formats it's available in. I think it's important that it's available in multiple formats. And if I see a book that's only available as an ebook and only as a soft cover, I immediately think, oh, this is CreateSpace, this is KDP. So then I'll read that first couple of free chapters to look for that very first typo, which is inevitably always there. And, I'll walk away from it. So if I see a book that's available in hardcover, audiobook, all the different formats, to me, that's a green light. That means the author took the time to get it out there for everybody. They're not going to go through those expenses unless they've taken the time to edit it properly. It's a sign of quality to me. And I think other people see that too.
How did you do your hardcover copy?
I did that through a company called Ingram Spark.
Oh yeah,
which is Lightning Source, and they actually, they're a distributor for a lot of the major publishers as well. They've got a new product coming out that they actually bought recently that a lot of people aren't familiar with. Have you ever heard of the Expresso book printing machine?
No, not yet.
Yeah, so this is a machine. It's roughly about the size of a tabletop or so, or about a desk. So you can put it pretty much anywhere. It will print off a paperback copy of a book in 5 minutes, full color cover and everything. It looks totally indistinguishable from another paperback. And right now they've got their full catalog in these machines, about 7 million titles. Personally, I think it's a game changer. Like when I walk into a Barnes & Noble or one of the big bookstores here in the US, it's a very difficult model to sustain. People go in there at this point, they get their cup of coffee, they pick a book off the shelf, they read it for an hour, then they put it back on the shelf and they leave. But meanwhile, somebody's got to pay for all this square footage. So I don't know where that's going to end up, a couple of years from now, but something's going to have to change there. But the biggest problem I see when I walk into an indie store, a small little independent bookstore, is their selection. They've got such a limited shelf space. So if they're lucky, they've got some of the latest bestsellers. But if you take this machine and put it in the middle of their store, not only do they have the physical hardcovers there for like the latest and greatest, but they can rattle off any other paperback that you might want while you stand there and wait. that's a game changer, because now all of a sudden, people aren't waiting for shipping from Amazon anymore. It's instant satisfaction.
That is amazing. So what, the cover and all, everything?
Yeah, it's the coolest thing ever to watch. If you just look up Expresso book printing machine, you can get to a list of places that actually have them. And it prints off you see the pages running while it's printing the cover, and then it mashes it all together and binds it. And it looks no different. I mean, it's basically the same type of technology that KDP uses for soft covers.
So what we need now, and Barnes & Noble need this as much as the indie bookstore, is the beautifully created virtual bookshelves. So they're made out of wood. They look lovely. You just swipe with your hand, Minority Report style, going through the covers, touch one. So it's almost the same as having the physical book there, which they could have around there as well. But if it's one of these books, you go to you press it, and by the time you've had your coffee and wandered to the counter, it's been printed. I can see that. I can see that. That potentially is a way that Barnes & Noble and Waterstones here in the UK can find a way into the future.
Or any little indie store. I mean, the machines are anywhere from $25,000 to $100,000 to buy. They can be leased for less than that. If I were to open a bookstore today, I wouldn't even consider it unless I had one of those in there. So again, I personally think it's a game changer. I think it's like Netflix or Redbox that we have here in the States for videos.
Wow, that is exciting. Okay, so do you feel optimistic about writing in the moment and for writers?
It's a weird thing, and that's one of the reasons why I like to get out in front of writers groups and talk, because I like them to understand what happened to me could happen to them. These things still happen. There are still big advances out there if you want to go that route. You can still make money as an indie author if you want to go that route. The key to all of it is just doing it right. Again, putting out that quality product. Make sure you go through all the hoops. Nothing in life is easy. Nobody's going to hand you a big check. But you can get there. You can get it if you try. If you put a lot of effort into it.
Yeah, and one of the things that struck me when I watched you on a panel at Thrillerfest was your talking very forthrightly to the audience about that focus on quality, about how important it was, and it was almost evangelical from you. It wasn't just about, well, you'll make more money if you do this. It was that you should be doing it right.
Yeah, well, I saw it when I was working as a book doctor. I got about 100 manuscripts every month that I had to go through. And if I was lucky, there was maybe one good one in there. You're reading along, and all of a sudden somebody's writing just jumps out at you, and you know that this is the product. That's no different than an editor. I mean, they're in the same boat. And things have changed so much, like budgets have gotten extremely tight. So years ago, an editor was willing to take on a project. They only had a couple of books they might have been working on. But if you talk to an editor nowadays, their desk is just stacked to the ceiling with the books that they're managing. Last thing they want to do is take on a project. They don't have time for that. So if you can hand them a book that's going to need the least amount of work, and it's a solid story and the writing is good, they're going to grab that, which is evident by what I've seen. Versus, somebody handing in a manuscript that's, just a complete mess. I mean, nobody's got time for that anymore. It's one that I really identified with Mark, because when he was talking, not only about quality, but also the marketing side of it and things like that, those are the things that you as an indie author, you need to understand. You are a business when you go through, when you do this, you're a business from start to finish. You have to do all these different things. And if you don't understand that at the get-go, you're going to drop the ball. And you may end up losing that particular book and have to start all over and try again.
Yeah. Yes, I find it a frustrating thing to hear sometimes with authors telling me that they don't want to do something. Like, I don't want to be on Facebook. Or I don't want to write the blurbs myself. I'm thinking, well, you don't have to write the blurb yourself, but you have to do all this stuff. It's like running a company saying, well, I don't want to do the accounts.
Well, but the thing is, like, Dracula is with Putnam, which is Random House. I wrote the backup book cover, with my editor. Like, we ended up tweaking that. The tagline that's on the book, on all my different books. Like, I create all that stuff in advance because I prefer people not to change it. So the more you hand them, the easier it is to get things done, and the more likely they are to stick to your actual words instead of somebody else weighing in with their opinion on what they feel should be there. It's worth taking the time, I think.
That's one of the reasons I ask you about the traditional deal, because even though you've got a great deal, I would think, just the maths-wise, would you not be making more money as an indie?
It's a tough thing to figure out. I think the two together work very well, because, again, the traditional guys are doing things with my books that I would never be able to do. There's still, at least in the States, a certain validity to your books being in Barnes & Noble, to people walking through that door and seeing them there. That name and brand recognition is big. And that's not something, as an indie that you can really do. But at the same time, I think if I were to have self-published Fourth Monkey, I think I probably would have. I would have probably made more than that advance was. I don't know whether it would be published in all the different countries that it is now. I don't know if there'd be a movie and TV deal for it. It's tough to say, but I'm very open to the idea of bouncing back and forth and continuing to indie publish while I traditionally publish. For me, a lot of this, it has to do with the actual release dates. I write fast enough where I can put 2 to 3 books out a year, but traditional publishers don't want to do that. They really want one title out of you a year. So if I have to offset, I'll indie publish. It just allows me to control those publication dates, so I can make sure I've got one in the spring, I've got one in the fall. With 3 different publishers out there, I mean, they don't work together. They just kind of put it out when they want to, and somebody's got to kind of steer the ship a little bit, and this gives you a little bit of control over your career.
Yeah, I do have a friend who signed a traditional deal knocking on 2 years ago, and the book has just come out in French that's the first edition, and it's still not out in the UK, still not out in the US, and I've been amazed at how long the process has taken with a traditional publishing house. They do take their time, don't they?
They do. I mean, Fourth Monkey is still coming out. I just saw a cover for Indonesia, I think 2 days ago. It came in on my Instagram feed. Like I didn't even know that it just released over there. I actually just saw people talking about it. But, that book was released here in the States, got 1.5 years ago already. So they do trickle out over time.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about your process, if that's okay, JD. So you alluded to the fact that you try to do 3 books a year. So how do you approach the book from the beginning to, it's quite interesting, you write the tagline and the blurb quite early on in the process.
Yeah, I usually start with the title, and I've got the tagline. I tend to see a lot of my books as movies, so I try to imagine the movie poster. So, the movie poster is my cover. That one sentence tagline is what the book is really about, and then I just kind of go from there. I'm what they call a pantser here in the U.S. I mean, they're organic writer. There's so many different terms for it, but I don't outline. Not for the most part. I'll create my beginning, my middle, and my end, and kind of go from there. I've learned to trust my subconscious quite a bit. When I get up at the end of any writing session, I tend to either quit in the middle of the sentence, or I know what the next sentence is going to be, rather than sitting down and writing like 5,000 words and literally running out of stuff to say. Because I've learned over time that if you do that, the next day when you sit down, you end up staring at a blank screen for a while, trying to get your brain to start working again. But if you get up and you know what's next, for the next 24 hours, your brain is your subconscious is working that story. You're washing dishes, but your next dialogue tag just jumps into your head, that kind of thing, and allows you to just hit the ground running every single day. And I start writing first thing in the morning. I get up at the crack of 8 o'clock because I can do that now. Grab my cup of coffee downstairs, and I make my commute up to my office. So about 15, 20 feet or so altogether. I don't turn the internet on until I'm done with my words for the day. I start writing at 8. I'm done about 11:30 or so, and I knock out about 2,000 to 3,000 words. That's when I turn on the internet and look at social media, check my email, all those types of things. Because even if you get a good email from your agent saying that this is happening, that's happening, it can be distracting. So it's best to just get the words done. You have to focus on what your bread and butter, and that's writing that next book. It's always writing that next book, regardless of what else is going on. And I spend the second half of the day usually working on marketing activity, doing interviews like this, working with bloggers, that type of thing, and try to find a balance between all of it. That's one of the tricky things that actually comes out of your book coming out in all these different countries over such an expanded period of time. Like I just did an interview yesterday for Romania, for Fourth Monkey.
Of course, your book would be big in Romania.
Well, we were actually talking about Fourth Monkey because that just came out.
Okay.
So they haven't even gotten to Dracula yet. So this is, I'm 2.5, 3 books, past that one already. And you're trying to do an interview as if you just, wrote it a week ago. So that gets a little tricky.
That's the same as George Clooney, by the way. He's when he sits down to do his publicity interview for the film, he's already made 2 films since then. So you must live a similar lifestyle. Yeah,
it tends to be like that. That's my typical day. I go for a run every day after that. I tend to hash out a lot of what I'm going to write the next day during that run. Just kind of rinse and repeat and start all over again.
Yeah, I love that practical tip on process. And I think I've been doing it by accident quite a lot because I'm really enjoying my writing at the moment. So I'm having to quit because it's time to quit. But I know what I'm going to be writing next. And you're quite right. Next time you sit down there, you're away writing. And it has happened also occasionally. It happens to all of us where you get to that scene, there needs to be a scene in between 2 scenes about, and you're not really sure what it is. And then when you, as you say, you start the next day looking at a blank page for a bit, which is not productive time. But yeah, it's a really great time. I think I was doing it by accident, but it's a great tip to hear vocalized.
Well, there's a couple other little tricks that I've learned over the years, because back when I was working the day job, I was working probably 70, 80 hours a week. But I still forced myself to come home and write every night. Because if you can do 250, 300 words every night, that's a novel within a year. And it's not difficult. That's a couple paragraphs. It's not much. But I learned that if you write in the same place every night, that's extremely helpful. So if you've got one place in your house and that's where you go to write, whenever you sit down in that spot, you write, and that's all you do there. That helps. I listen to a thunderstorm soundtrack, doing a white noise as I write. And it's a Pavlov's dog thing to me. I put my headphones on, and as soon as I hear that thunderstorm kick in, my brain goes, "Oh, we're writing now." Those types of things will allow you, if you are working the day job and you're coming home and trying to make this kind of thing happen, those things will, help push it forward a little bit. Yeah, but it is important to write every day. I mean, it's like a muscle. You have to exercise it. If you don't, it goes away quickly. And my normal pace is 2,000 to 3,000 words. But when I go to a conference, I have a difficult time writing, and I'll get back home, and then just cranking out 1,000 words is difficult. It takes a couple of days to get back into that rhythm.
Yeah, there's no magic formula here to replace doing it.
No, it only works in the movies where they sit down at the typewriter and they crank out a novel in a couple of hours.
Yeah. So talking of movies, let's conclude, if you like, with a little chat about your transition to the screen. Then, so you first of all, as a process thing, you think about the story in movie form at the beginning, which helps you with the marketing and the story. But you've actually made the transition a couple of times. So I think Dracula's been picked up, as you say, even before.
Yeah. Dracula was picked up by Paramount. That one, it looks like it's moving pretty quickly. As far as I know, Andy is doing the next It installment that's coming out very soon. I think that we might actually be the next project on his to-do list, which I'm hoping. Fourth Monkey actually sold to CBS. We had an auction. Both projects had auctions, but with that one, with Fourth Monkey, CBS came to the table and they said, well, listen, we can do not only a feature film, but we can also do a follow-up TV show, because they've got a film division and they've got the television division. And that's what sold it for me. As an author, the one thing everybody wants a movie. It's like you write the book and it's like, I want to see a movie. So you think that's your next big thing. But when I started talking to the producers and the directors about Fourth Monkey, the first thing they would weigh in with is, well, this is a long book. In order to get it down to a 2-hour film, we're going to have to cut this out. We're going to have to combine these characters. This is going to have to happen. That's going to have to happen. And it kind of becomes a different story. Then I had the same conversations with the people that make movies for Netflix and HBO and things like that. And it's a very different conversation, because not only they tell you that they can make the story as you wrote it, but they look for additional material. They want to know what you cut out of the book so they can expand it. So I kind of leaned in that direction. Initially I wanted a movie, but then, the idea of being able to tell a story that way, was really enticing. But I read years ago, and this might be an on-writing from Stephen King, but it's someplace. But he mentioned that the only thing that is actually yours as an author is the physical book, the printed text. That's yours 100%. The second somebody does an audiobook, now it's the narrator's take on your words. So it's already different. And if you sign a film or a TV contract, forget about it. It's not your project anymore. It's their project. And I've seen that. I'm the executive producer on all my different projects, but they have to pay me if they pick up the phone. Hollywood's got pretty, Bridget machines in place. Every director has producers that they work with. They've got writers that they like to work with. These close-knit groups. And the last thing they want is the writer, raising their hand every 5 minutes going, no, this should happen. I don't like that idea. I think we should do it this way, because it gets expensive. So they tend to cut the writer out of it a little bit.
I'm also not sure it results in the best product. And there's a couple of big examples where the writer has forced themselves to have a say in the film and the TV adaptation. And they're writers, and the people who make films and TV know what they're doing. And it's a different art form.
Yeah, I mean, I would no more expect them to weigh in on my next book than I would ever, weigh in on their project. That's their skill set. It's what they know how to do. I let the experts do it.
And I guess these deals were done through your agent. So I was going to ask you a bit about, some tips for writers listening to this who may have been approached in the past, but your agent would have handled probably negotiations, or were you integral to that?
Yeah, I've got 3 different agents. I've got one who handles domestic, so basically U.S., Canada, the English speaking, and then I've also got a foreign agent who does all the other countries, so Russia, Poland, Germany, France, all these other countries that I'm in. She handles that, and then I also have a film and television agent who does nothing but market my books to that particular world.
Okay. JD, we've been rattling on for some time, and I'm heavy with cold, and we had technical issues that meant we changed horses midstream. So I'm very grateful for you to bear with us. Every time I speak to you, I feel we barely touch the surface. So we will no doubt talk to you again. Are you going to be in New York again in the summer for Thriller Fest?
Yeah, I will definitely be at Thriller Fest. I've got a couple other conferences coming up, but yeah, New York for sure.
Okay, superb. And just to remind people, if they want to read your work, and which I think is very worthwhile, your Fourth Monkey is out now in English language?
Yeah, Fourth Monkey's been out for a while now. The sequel in the UK is it's actually available in ebook, but they haven't released the print yet. The print version's coming out in December, which is something I've never seen anybody do. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. Dracula has been released worldwide, so that's available there. I was actually just in London and Ireland a couple of weeks ago promoting that title.
Fantastic. And I think I mentioned to you that Gary Oldman was 2 seats away from me on the plane last Friday night, and of course he played Dracula in the what I thought was the great film Bram Stoker's. That's true to Bram Stoker's story. I think that film.
Yeah, that's still my favorite for sure. We could go on an hour just about Dracula and Dracula and Bram Stoker. For the amount of effort in that book and the things that got cut is a conversation all by itself.
Well, I would love you to be a regular on the podcast, and I think we should narrow down. We've talked very motivational. I think you're brilliant in terms of you sound very much like Mark, which is why we latched onto you quite quickly in terms of getting it right, putting being the best you can, keeping writing, all that stuff is great. But let's spend an hour next time talking about suspense.
Yeah,
how
absolutely.
Suspense works, because I think you're fascinated on that as well.
I appreciate it. I'd love to be back.
Brilliant. Thank you, JD.
All right, thank you.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
So there we go, JD Barker. It was such fun to meet him in New York, and brilliantly, he has become a big fan of this particular show. So he tells me he listens to every episode, and so he was really pleased to come back on. He actually said to me, so earnest, he said afterwards, let's do it again because we can talk about other stuff. But I think JD's the sort of person we should talk to once a year because he's so well plugged into the industry. And I can listen to him and also feed off his sort of inspirational energy. Yeah, great guy.
Yeah, I agree. No, he's a good guy and lots of interesting ideas, and I shared lots of them. So it's it's good to get him on, and I'm up for him coming back next year as well.
Yeah, and let's see if we can get him along to the SPF Drinks in New York. Are you coming to Thriller? I can't remember which one you're not coming to. You're not coming to Thriller Fest, are you? Well, no. You'll miss out. But we'll get JD Barker along to the bar in New York if we can, if he's at Thriller Fest this year, and then you can have a chat with him and meet him as well. He's a really great guy. Good. Well, I think that's it. Enough of our irrelevant guff, or whatever it is that man said. We mustn't latch on. So one person comes up with one criticism amongst 60 compliments, and all you think about
I know, it's natural to do that, but no, it's concentrate on the good stuff. We should, we have done, I think, an episode on dealing with criticism in the past, and we should do one again because there are ways to do that. Good. But it's been brilliant talking to you this week, and brilliant having you on the show as well, Mark. Thank you for joining us. It's been average talking to you. I've enjoyed our social intercourse. I feel a bit dirty. I need a shower now. Okay, good. Thank you so much. We'll be back next Friday. Bye-bye. Get show notes, the podcast archive, and free resources to boost your writing career at selfpublishingshow.com. Join our thriving Facebook group at selfpublishingshow.com/Facebook. Support the show at patreon.com/selfpublishing show. And join us next week for more help and inspiration so that you can make your mark as a successful indie author. Publishing is changing, so get your words into the world and join the revolution with the Self-Publishing Show.